And good evening and welcome to this webinar on how to ace number properties. This is our second session in number properties for our paid students. It's our first free webinar in number properties. In this webinar, we're going to focus primarily on divisibility and remainders. And what we're going to do in this webinar is demonstrate how you can take a simple concept and answer the most challenging questions based on it. And again, the key to answering those questions is to make sure you understand the concept and not just know the concept, but understand how to apply the concept. So this is a very application focused webinar, and to make sure that you guys are up, you have the right foundation to be able to apply these concepts, we did send these 2 video lessons your way on prime numbers 1 and 2. If you've not gone through these video lessons, they are a part of your free trial. So I do recommend that you go through them post this webinar. With that, let's get to know you guys a bit more. Let's figure out what's your target GMAT score overall. And here's another poll question where you can put that information in. Also, we have a couple of upcoming webinars. We have a free webinar on GMAT reading comprehension. That webinar is next Saturday. It's a webinar in which we tell you how you can ace GMAT reading comprehension without really reading tons of books. The predominant impression that people have today is that to ace GMAT RC, you need to be a voracious reader. In this webinar, we demonstrate, or Pyle demonstrates, how by focusing on some key reading strategies, you can ace GMAT reading comprehension, get to that 90 percentile in GMAT RC with 5 days of effort. Also, we have a proctored mock test, which is a quant workshop, which is next Sunday, so a week from now. Think of it as a mock test that not only tells you where you are, but also gives you insights as to what you should focus on to get to that next level. So if you are at Q44, it'll tell you what are the areas that you need to focus on to get to a Q49 or a Q50 and so on and so forth. All right, so let's get to know you guys a bit more. Let's talk about when do you guys plan to take the test. So based on the data that I have so far, I have one large group, which is those who have between 46 and 75 days, and then 3 similarly sized groups, which is where you have about 14.5% of the class of their test right away, similar size in a month to 45, and then about 18% haven't taken their data as of yet. And then we have a few folks who have the between a couple of weeks to a month. And then with regards to the target score, what I really see is about 65% or 66% more or less are aiming for a score of 730 or higher. We have about 14% of you who are in that 600 to 700 bucket overall. All right, with that, let's go into the webinar pane. By the way, let me introduce my team. My name is Rajesh Sirana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your co-host today. Pyle Tandon, who's the other co-founder of e-GMAT, is going to be a main host. To support us during this webinar, we have Sandeep, who's a GMAT strategy expert, and Ashutosh, who's a GMAT quant expert. Now, the screen should have changed for pretty much everyone over here. You should be seeing number properties 2, quant live session, and below that you should be seeing a Q&A or a question and answer pod. If at any time during this webinar you face a question or you face any technical difficulty, you're welcome to post that question in the Q&A pod, and Ashutosh or Sandeep will make sure that you get an excellent response. There are essentially 3 parts of this webinar. In the first part, we're going to give you a brief introduction to e-GMAT. In the second part, we're going to get right to the core of this webinar, which is how to ace number properties. Remember, this is the second session, so we're going to focus primarily on divisibility and remainders, and we're going to apply a very simple concept and solve the most challenging questions that you're going to see on number properties. And then towards the end, if you still have questions that aren't answered, we'll slot some time to answer those questions. More specifically, if those questions do not, and once again I repeat, do not pertain to divisibility and remainders aspect, but other aspects of GMAT quant or GMAT verbal or your overall B school candidacy. So with that, let's start with the first part of the webinar, which is an introduction to e-GMAT. So earlier I asked this question, what's your target GMAT score? And about 65% of you said it's 730 or higher. And while over 65% of you are aiming for that score, statistically, only 6% of people get to that score. And this is despite the fact that B schools continue to demand higher and higher scores. And these are median scores. That's from the top B schools and this data is from 2018. So what is it that people who get to those scores do? A good percentage of them use e-GMAT. Why do I say that? When you look at two stats on the world's leading forums, one is the number of verified reviews. The second is a number of success stories that have been posted in the last 12 months. You're going to actually come to a very similar conclusion. Now, what makes our students more successful? If there's one thing that distinguishes us from other prep companies is our approach to GMAT preparation or the architecture of learning that we offer. And to understand how the architecture of learning that we offer is different from the dominant architecture out there, let's kind of study the two architectures of learning. There are essentially two dominant architectures that exist today. One is what we call as the book-based architecture, and the second is the private tutoring-based architecture. When you look at most of the other prep companies such as Magoosh, Veritas Prep or Manhattan Prep, what you're going to find is even though they offer audiovisual courses, their core offerings are built around that book-based architecture. Whereas when you compare the e-GMAT and try and map it to one of these two architectures, you're going to find that e-GMAT centered around that private tutoring-based approach. So let's see why one architecture is better or more successful than the other in helping you get to that 720 or higher score. To do that, let's see how do you do that? What's a good way to get to a 720 or higher score? So if you want to get to that score, the first thing you need to do is to create a path that's efficient for you to get to the 720 score. Then you need to define the areas that you need to focus on and where you don't know the concepts and learn those concepts. Just merely knowing concepts isn't enough. Now, as we're going to see in this webinar, most of you would know the concepts that are being applied in this webinar, but it's the application of those concepts is where you're going to falter. So you also need to learn how to apply those concepts. And again, you need to then attain a level of mastery by continuing to improve that is superior. You need to get so good at applying those concepts that you are among those top 6 percentile of students. So let's see how a book-based approach solves this problem. So starting with study plan, a book-based approach is all about autonomy. When you start studying using books, books don't create custom study plans for you. They give you a couple of study plans and you've got to choose one of those study plans. And essentially, you choose the study plan without thinking a whole lot and start learning concepts. Now, when you learn concepts, there are a number of books that will teach you concepts in quant, and they're really good sources of concepts. And they do them in a very comprehensive manner. Now, the problem, the only problem is, especially those of you who basically don't have the best foundation out there, that when you learn a concept, a book doesn't tell you how well you've learned the concept. So that burden of validation is completely on you. One area where books falter, in my opinion, the most is teaching you how to apply those concepts. Even when you learn concepts, the format of the book is ill-suited to teaching you, hey, when you see a problem, do this in step 1, do this in step 2, do this in step 3. And it's not just ill-suited to teaching you that, it doesn't also give you feedback as to where could you have made faltered and so on and so forth. So as a result, people who study using books solve hundreds and hundreds of questions to master application, and only the best and the brightest are able to do that. And again, similar to this, when it comes to evaluating whether you've mastered a certain topic or not, such as number properties or even divisibility and remainders or word problems with geometry, people who study using books, take mock tests. And then again, even when you take a mock test, that onus of evaluation is completely on you. A private tutoring-based approach works slightly differently. When you work with a good private tutor, not just any, but a good private tutor, the first thing that a good private tutor would do is spend a couple of hours evaluating your strengths and weaknesses and then creating a personalized study plan. And when the private tutor does that, he or she ensures that you reserve enough time to work on your weaknesses as well as you spend enough time to solidify your strengths and make the most out of them. Then a good private tutor would teach you concepts and then evaluate you while teaching you concepts and giving you feedback as to the areas that you still need to work on. One area where working with the private tutor helps the most is when you learn application of concepts. So while teaching you concepts, right after that, a good private tutor would start teaching you how to apply those concepts, starting with the easiest questions and then moving on to the next set of challenging and towards the end, the most challenging questions. And again, as you falter, a private tutor would tell you the steps in which you're faltering. And essentially, as you go through the subject matter portion of this webinar, you're going to experience this very similar phenomenon. And then as you continue to learn how to apply concepts, a private tutor evaluates whether you mastered a particular topic well enough so that you can move from one topic to the other. So what's the difference between these two approaches? While you learn the same content, the extent of feedback, the extent of application is a lot more in a private tutoring based approach, and it's easy to see why that approach leads to a lot higher success, much higher score improvement. So let's see, why do we say that that essentially most of the other courses out there are built around that book-based approach, whereas e-GMAT's built around this private tutoring-based approach. And we're going to take that example of going from that score of 600 to a 720. Now, the first step in this is to create good customized study plans, and to enable everyone over here to do that, we build this utility called GMAT Planner. It's an artificial intelligence based utility that has 3 neural networks running in there, which empowers everyone to build their study plan. And how does it do that? It first takes your current scores into account. And if you don't have your current scores, we have diagnostics that will help you get those current scores. And then, and this utility is smart enough to understand that even though you basically have 50 percentile in both scores, a Q44 means much higher ability than what a V28 does. Accordingly, when it gives a recommended score to get to a 720, it makes sure that it improves your quant score up to a Q50 and then improves the verbal score accordingly. Now, if you wanted to change that, because it has 3 neural networks running in there, you could actually just manually enter your target quant or target verbal score until it adjusts the other score automatically. Now you have a target quant and a target verbal score. You still have to figure out how do you get to a Q50 and how do you get to a V38. And to do that, this utility tells you the various ways in which you can get to a Q50 and gives the best one for you given your starting abilities in arithmetic and algebra. And it does the same thing on the verbal side of things. So when you do that, you can really see that your GMAT preparation becomes not just a black box in which you're studying quant or studying verbal, but it's a set of 5 neatly defined milestones where you're going from a starting ability in arithmetic to a target ability in arithmetic and doing the same thing on the verbal side of things. Now, when it does that, it also figures out how much emphasis should you be putting in its subsection given your starting and ending scores. And it creates this plan for you where you say, hey, start with arithmetic, spend about 8 to 9 days on it given the amount of time that you're spending per day, and make sure you hit that 83rd percentile. Spend more time on algebra because your starting ability is lower in algebra, and so on and so forth. And again, you can see at the bottom over here where the study plan was created on 3rd of March and it ends on 9th of May. So you have this entire vision of your GMAT preparation. And when you have that, your personalized GMAT preparation is not just in verbal or quant, but it's in SCC or an RC, and you have these milestones defined. Beyond that, it also goes on and creates a calendar view. And if you figure out that, hey, some of these days you can't study, you can really just click on that particular day, adjust the amount of time that you think you can put in on that day, and the plan adjusts by itself. So why did we do this? The reason we spent upwards of 1,000 hours building this utility is so that each one of you can create your study plan in 7 minutes or fewer. And so far, we've had upwards of 4,000 people who've created their study plans. This utility was launched on 27th of February, and just in about a couple of months, 4,000 people have created their personalized study plans. That's about study planning, and I can tell you that even those people who work with private tutors don't get as precise a study plan with such precise estimates and a focus with regards to the sequence in which you should be doing things. Now, the next thing that a private tutor does is he teaches you the concepts that you don't know. And since in this webinar we focus on divisibility and remainders, let's talk about the divisibility and remainders module. So what you really see is you've dedicated concept files in there. And in these concept files, we do give you feedback. Now, before I get to that feedback, let me show you how other courses teach divisibility and remainders. And let me just go back over here. One thing that you're going to notice is the extent of comprehensiveness is a lot more here versus over here. This entire module that you saw on the e-GMAT side was for divisibility and remainders. Over here, you just see 3 files over here in divisibility and remainders. And the second thing that you're going to really notice is that there's actually very little tracking. This time that you see over here is the time of the video, not the time that you spent on the video. Now let's see how we evaluate you constantly as you're studying within the webinar. So here's the screenshot of what goes on inside the video in the e-GMAT course. We teach you the concept, and then we give you, really good animated high definition videos where each of these items appears beautifully synced with the audio and at the relevant time. Then we teach you practice questions where we have you apply the concept that you've just learned, and you see the 2 practice questions over there. And you're going to see some of this application in this webinar as well. So essentially, you learn a concept, you're able to apply that concept, and then there are quizzes right after that concept as well. Now, in the Magoosh offering, the same thing is done in a slightly different manner. It actually is fairly verbose, and there's very little interactivity. Essentially, this seems like a book in an audiovisual format. Now, let's talk about application of concepts. In the e-GMAT course, we built dedicated files in which we teach you application. Then we also have files in which we have you apply the same concepts over here. So we have these practice files, and then towards the end, we also have a set of carefully chosen official guide questions where you can apply the same concepts. Again, we track how well you're doing. You can see the scores. These are your scores. These are your times overall. And this is how every module, whether it's a quant module or a verbal module in e-GMAT architecture, is architected. Again, compare this to the Magoosh course. What you really see is there's one quiz out there towards the end, but again, there's no score. The idea is to just give you practice, but not feedback. Remember, this quiz is also common just not only to divisibility, but to primes and GCM and LCD. Why is this important? The reason why this is important is because your goal is to ace algebra. It's not to just study algebra overall. The next piece is to really understand, hey, have you hit your targetability? And again, to enable you to do that, we build this tool called Scholaranium, in which we have ability quizzes. Once you do algebra, you can take an algebra ability quiz in which you get to figure out how well you're doing in various aspects of algebra. And it's very clear that this particular student needs to focus on inequalities and functions. And once he focuses on inequalities and functions, this particular student would be able to improve his algebra ability to the required level. So again, while you're learning the same content, you can really see how e-GMAT's built around this private tutoring based approach, whereas most of the other courses out there are built around this book based architecture. Now, both of these courses offer audiovisual learning. It's the extent of feedback, the extent of personalization, the manner in which learning is imparted, that's very different overall. Now, who's picked this technology and who's built all of this content? Some of GMAT Club's top 5 rated instructors have done this. Instructors who've been reviewed a lot more frequently on GMAT Club. So while only 6% of the people get to that 720 or higher score, you can really see why a good percentage of them use e-GMAT. We did start our quant and verbal batches yesterday. So with every live course that we offer, we actually offer a score improvement guarantee, and it's a pure guarantee. With our verbal course, for example, we offer a 4-point score improvement guarantee, which means, let's say you have a V30, we guarantee you'd get a V34, otherwise we refund your money. Even when you have a V37, we guarantee a V41, which is 93rd percentile. Typical batch runs for about 6 weeks or so, and it's designed for working professionals. So courses do take place on the weekend at 7 a.m. Pacific, which is 3 p.m. UK and 7:30 p.m. IST. Similar thing on the quant side of things. We had our first session on number properties. This is the a free session, which is number properties 2. A quant course comes with a 3-point score improvement guarantee. Again, if you have a Q41, we guarantee a Q44. If you have a Q47, we guarantee a Q50. And unlike other courses, this is a pure guarantee, which means, hey, we don't ask you to take the test multiple times. If you've taken the test one, you take this course, you don't improve, we simply refund your money. With that, I've come to the end of my introduction. If you want to stay connected with all things e-GMAT, if you want to stay updated with everything that's going on in the B School world, you can connect with me on my LinkedIn. I have upwards of 11,000 students connected with me on LinkedIn. With that, I would now like to invite Payal to take over and start the second part of the subject matter, or the core part of this webinar, and help you ace divisibility and remainders. Payal, over to you.
Thank you, Rajat. Good morning, good evening, and hello, everyone. My name is Payal, and I would be your host in this section of the webinar. And let's make sure that all of you can hear me clearly. Can you please press yes if you can hear me clearly? All right, sounds good. So I'm going to remove the batch calendar part for now, and then I'm going to bring that back towards the end of the session for those of you who haven't downloaded the calendar yet. All right, so let's get started here. Now, before I go ahead with this session, what I would want to understand is that where do you currently face issues with your quant preparation? And you can keep it as generic as quant in general, or you can be as specific as number properties, 2 topics that we're going to discuss in this session. So just tell me, where do you find yourself struggling in quant or in number properties? And be a little bit more specific. What in number properties is an issue? What in data sufficiency is a problem for you? All right, so let's read through a few comments here. Decimals, exponents, variables. Just started my prep, coordinate geometry, data sufficiency, sets and number properties, probability, okay. It's been a while studying after job, so concepts and foundation, all right, okay. Okay, sounds good. Now, I'm going to get a yes no poll. Just give me 1 second. How many of you face issues with data sufficiency? Okay, almost all of you. Okay. So what we're going to do in this session is we are going to focus, again, the purpose of this session is to make sure that you understand what is the key to mastering GMAT Quant. And the first and the foremost thing in that is sound understanding of basics. And the second one is having a very structured approach to solving questions. So that's what we're going to be focusing on in this session. Now we are going to take up number properties, topics under number properties too, which is divisibility, remainders. So we are going to be taking up those topics to prove that, okay, if you have to ace GMAT Quant, these are the 2 most essential things that you need to do. Now, whatever you learn in this session, you will be able to apply across the board to the other sections of quant as well. Okay, so it's not limited just to the topics that I'm going to be talking about today. Yes, the concepts that I teach you are going to be limited to those topics, but the whole idea of how is it that you need to prepare for quant is going to be applicable across the board. Now, how is the session structured? So we begin with data sufficiency questions. As you all just saw, data sufficiency seems to be that nemesis, seems to be that difficult aspect of quant in the minds of everyone. So we're going to begin with data sufficiency questions. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you an opportunity to solve 3 data sufficiency questions. Now, I'm going to just give you, we are just going to be solving those questions in the beginning. Once you get a flavor of what kind of questions you'll be able to solve by the end of this session, we'll start off with a warm-up section in which we are going to just expose you to the kind of concepts that you need to have a solid handle on to be able to solve the questions that you were just exposed to. Okay, so if you think about it, this one is just a flavor. This one is just for your own flavor, just to set up the stage. And then beyond this section, we are going to now start off with building your sound basics, and then we're going to increase the difficulty level of questions. We're going to further increase the difficulty level of questions, and here at the end we're going to show you the same questions again, give you the opportunity to solve these questions once more. Hopefully more people would be able to answer these questions correctly, and then we're going to discuss these questions in detail. So what you'll see is how sound basics and structured process can help you solve even the most difficult questions on quant. Okay, so that's how we're going to be progressing in this session. All right, so let's get started with the first section here. And again, just do your best in solving these questions. Some of you may not have the basics yet, basic set yet. That's okay. Just give your best. We are going to be by the time you end this session, you will be able to solve these three questions really very well. Okay, so if everyone can please click on still solving, I'd really appreciate that. Now, one more thing about when I give you questions to solve, I don't time you guys necessarily. I don't put a stringent time limit of 2 minutes or 1.5 minutes. What I see is that when about half of the class has put in its responses, I just give a 10-second or a 30-second warning depending upon the complexity of the question. So in this case, because all the three questions are difficult, I am going to be giving you a 30-second warning when 50% of the class has put in the responses. So can you all please click on still solving here? That way I know how many people are actively engaged in solving the question. I don't want to be waiting up for people who are not really solving questions in the session. Okay, let's get this number to at least 60. I have about 120 people in the session right now. All right. Okay, so here you go. Here's the question. Last 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Okay, here is your next question. Can you all please click on still solving? All right, very nice. Here you go, question number 9. Last 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. And here comes question number 10. Can you please click on still solving? All right. Here is question 10. Go ahead. Last 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Sounds good. So, how was the experience? Did you feel challenged? Did you feel that these were up your alley? How did you feel? Okay. Well, it's okay to feel this way. And what you really need to understand is that by the time we are at the end of this session, you will basically feel very much in control of such questions. Okay, so that's okay. It's absolutely fine to feel this way. At least now you have a goal, right? You have a goal to aspire towards for this session. Okay, so let's get into our warm up section now. We are going to start from the very basics, very basic concepts. What we are going to do now is give you simple questions, and we are going to these questions are going to be on divisibility and remainders. You will be solving these questions. I'll be giving you feedback on your current conceptual knowledge based on your responses to these questions, but I won't be discussing the concepts in detail. This is going to be simply you know this concept or you don't know this concept. After the session, go back and revise these concepts so that you are absolutely comfortable with them. Okay, so yeah, so I have this question here. Uh, do such difficult questions come in GMAT? Definitely, yes. If you're aspiring for a quant score of 49, 50, or 51, then definitely you are going to see such questions on the test. And when we solve these questions towards the end, you will realize they are not really that complicated. As long as you keep those two things in mind, have a very strong conceptual base, and have a very structured process of solving questions. Okay, so again, my goal over here to give you these questions up front was just to set a target for you for this session so that all of us are striving towards that target. Okay, so let's go into our warm-up mode now. These are going to be easy questions. Just get back to basics and solve these questions. So here you go. And if you can reopen the poll, yeah, go ahead. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. The correct answer here is choice B. Z is always divisible by 3. So for those of you who selected choice B, good job. For those of you who did not select choice B, let's go through the solution real quick. What is a divisibility rule of 3? Sum of digits should be divisible by 3, right? So what you've been given is Z is a 3-digit number whose digits are consecutive numbers. So if I simply assume that the first digit of the number Z is X, then I know that the second digit is X plus 1. I know that the third digit is X plus 2. So I get my number Z as sum of the digits of this number as X plus 1 plus X plus 2. And if I simplify this, what I get is that Z is the sum of digits of the number Z is equal to 3x plus 3. Now this number is always divisible by 3 regardless of the value of x. Okay, so that's why if this condition is true, then Z is always divisible by 3. So for those of you who did not select choice B as the correct answer, which step did you falter in? You could have either faltered at this step over here, wherein you didn't know what the divisibility rule of 3 is, or you could have faltered at this step, wherein you didn't know how to process this information about about the digits being consecutive numbers. So which step did you falter at? So rule, okay, so then the feedback for you is that you need to go back and revise the concept. Process, okay, second step. All right, so again, these things, eh, this is a process skill that you need to build. How do you translate the information that the digits are consecutive numbers into mathematical form? How do you do this kind of translation? This is a process skill that you definitely need to build upon. Okay, so as you go through our e-GMAT course, you will see different application files teaching you these process skills. Okay, can numbers be plugged in such questions? You can plug in numbers. However, then you'll have to know how many different kinds of numbers do you need to plug in. Okay, what are the different varieties of numbers that you need to plug in? And that can be challenging because you may miss out on certain cases. That's why for such questions, it's always important to go back to the basics. This is the basic. What is a divisibility rule? How do I process information? How do I translate information regarding consecutive numbers into mathematical form? And these kinds of basics you are going to be applying from the easiest of the questions to the most difficult of the questions. And you'll see the application of this aspect when we look at the DS questions that you just solved towards the end of this session. Okay, so everyone with me with regards to how you should have approached this question? And again, it's important for those of you who answered this question correctly to learn from the mistakes that other people are doing. I mean, this is your opportunity to sit down with your colleagues and kind of just, understand, okay, what kind of mistakes other people are doing and learn from those as well. Okay, there are certain things that come naturally to you, and you should give yourself credit for that, right? But then again, you realize that you are doing those things correctly in a natural manner only when you see that there are people who are making those mistakes. Okay, so again, this is something which I tell everyone when you are reviewing your work. Okay, whether you're working independently, whether you're working with your study buddy, always make sure that you review not only the questions that you get wrong, you should always review the questions that you get correct, because there's a lot of opportunity to learn from a solution that is written in a proper manner to figure out, okay, I could have missed at this step, okay, or I could have done this step better, right? So always make sure that you do that in your learning phase. Okay, so let's move on to our next question, question number 2. And here you go. I'm going to go ahead and solve this question. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. So the correct answer here is choice A, which about 40% of the class selected. Now let's figure out where you guys faltered, people who didn't select choice A. So what's given to me is Z is a 4-digit number whose digits are consecutive numbers. So tell me, what is the divisibility rule for 4? Because that's what has been asked in the question, in the choices. Last two digits should be what? Last two digits should be divisible by 4. Absolutely right. That's the divisibility rule of 4, right? Now, how do I process this information? In the previous question, I was given the same thing, that last two whose digits are consecutive numbers, right? But in this question, but in the previous question, it was straightforward to take the sum of digits, to assume the number x as the first digit and then basically take their sum. But in this case, sum is not what the divisibility rule is. So I need to think about how to process this information, how to convert this information so that I can do my divisibility test and figure out what the fate of z is with regards to divisibility by 4. Okay, so I need to think about that. Right, I can't just blindly apply whatever I did in the previous question. So here I have to consider certain cases. Why? Because if the divisibility rule, because divisibility rule of 4 pertains to certain cases, right? Either the number z could be odd or the number z could be even, right? And then in even case as well, there are other cases that are possible, right? Now, when I take z could be odd as a case, I basically take up a number 2, 3, 4, 5, which meets my criteria that the digits are consecutive numbers. Digits for z are consecutive numbers, right? And in this case, I absolutely know directly that z is not a number that is divisible by 4. Okay, so I know for sure that choice B is not the correct answer. So for 8 of you who selected choice B did not consider this case that z could be an odd number. Okay, now I move further, and likewise, okay, now z could be even. That's another case that's possible. Now in this even case, there are numbers in the even universe in which the last two digits are divisible by 4 and the last two digits are not divisible by 4. So I take up those examples, right? The last two digits may be divisible by 4 and the last two digits may not be divisible by 4. So now if this is the case, then yes, the number z is divisible by 4. But if this is the case, then the number z is not divisible by 4. So I have cases depending upon what the number z is that satisfies that the digits are consecutive numbers. I have cases in which z could be divisible by 4 and z could not be divisible by 4. So my correct answer here is choice A, that z may be divisible by 4. So what you're seeing in this question is that you have to consider all the possible cases for the number z. Okay, and you have to go about it in a very logical manner. You have to start off with, okay, what could z be? Z could be either even or odd. Okay, there is no other case that's possible. Now, in the case of even, z could either have two digits that are divisible by 4 or the last two digits that are not divisible by 4. There is no other case that's possible. Okay, so you're actually coming up with your sample space possible for the number z in order to solve this question. Okay, and that's what you did over here. So for those of you who got the correct answer, let me get a yes no poll here for us. So for those of you who marked choice A as the correct answer, did you follow the process that I followed here for the solution? Very nice. Half of the class did, half of those who selected choice A. Okay. All right. Now, for those of you who faltered here, who didn't select choice A, tell me, what did you falter at? And again, such kind of introspection is very, very important because these are all very easy questions. Your difficult questions build upon these concepts. Didn't know the rules, tested value instead, divisibility rule. Okay. So for those of you who didn't know the rules, you are rusty in your concepts, so go back and review your rules. Okay, so that's good. Misread and applied the concept of previous question. Okay. Then did not know even odd. Okay, just missed upon 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. All right. So I hope you guys are now able to understand what you need to work on. Okay. All right. So let's now move on to our next question, question number 3 here. Go ahead. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Good job here. Choice C is the correct answer. Now, what's the divisibility rule of 8? That last three digits should be divisible by 8. Okay. Now, in this case, if I take up the last three digits of this number, 897, I divide that by 8 and that gives me the remainder as 1. So, the closest number to this number that is divisible by 8 will be the one that's ending in 896, and the correct answer here is choice C. So, relatively straightforward question. Let's come to our next question, question number 4. Now, this is where things get a little bit different. So, focus on this question very carefully. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. So majority of the class got this question correct. The correct answer is choice D. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you solved for n before getting to the remainder when n is divided by 4? So how many of you figured out what the value of n is before getting to the final answer? So majority of the class. What was the value of n that you got here? Okay. All right. So let's so the way now the method that you guys used, that is it's not, so you're absolutely right. The value of n is not really unique, right? N is of the form 204k plus 3. So but the method that you used is correct. There is nothing wrong in that method. You took one value and then you figured out, okay, what the remainder is, right? For this question, it works. But it's important to understand how to solve this using using sound fundamentals, so that you can utilize that method across the board, even when the numbers are really too big to do the calculations, or even when the information given is a bit more complex than the information given in this question. So what I'm going to do now is show you that method, and you'll see throughout this session, because we are going to build upon this particular concept, you're going to see how by applying that method you can solve even the most difficult of questions. Okay, so let's go through that. So here I'm going to apply my very first this method which is based on first principles. Dividend is equal to divisor into quotient plus remainder. Okay. Now what's given to me is, what I have to figure out is that what is the remainder when n is divided by 4. So what I need to figure out is n is equal to 4p plus r, and I need to find the value of r. Okay. Now what is given to me is, in terms of in terms of the first piece of information, what's given to me is that n is equal to 204q plus 3. So all I'm doing over here is I'm assuming some quotient, and I'm basically translating whatever information is given to me in terms of this particular equation. Okay, so what I have here is n is equal to 204q plus 3. What I have to find is the remainder r in this particular equation, where I know that r is less than 4. Okay, now what I have to do is, I simply have to apply my process skill of visualization, and I have to write 204q in terms of 4p. Okay, and that's what I'm able to do here. I know that 204q can be written as 4 into 51q, and when I do that, I basically get n is equal to 4 into 51q plus 3. Now I simply compare the terms in this equation with the terms present in this equation, and I can directly say that, okay, r is equal to 3. Okay, so what I have done over here is, I've simply taken up what it is that I need. I got my equation from what it is that I need, and then I got another equation from what is given to me, and I'm simply converting this equation in the form of this equation, so that I can find the value of of the required quantity R. Okay, everyone gets the method? Yes, no? Okay, there are a few students who are not getting the method. Tell me what your doubt is. All right, I don't see anyone typing here. How does that confirm? How did you connect the two equations? Okay, please explain again. Okay, so I'm going to explain this one time more. So I apologize for people who already understood this part. So just bear with me for a couple of minutes, because if this if I don't teach this concept really well to everyone, then again the subsequent questions will become difficult. Okay, so again, what I'm saying is, okay, so let me read this comment. I just figured that 204 was divisible by 4, so remainder would be the same. And that's absolutely correct. That is what we are doing over here. I'm just presenting that in a more mathematical form. But in principle, that's precisely what I'm doing. 204q is a multiple of 4, and that's why this equation is actually in the form of this equation over here. I'm just writing it in a mathematical form. That's about it. Why compare? I'm comparing this so that I can find the value of R from the given information. Okay, that's all I'm doing over here. So I'm just presenting 204q in the form of 4p to see, okay, to see what my remainder R will be. That's all I'm doing. I'm just writing this equation with the given equation in the form of what I need. Okay, that's all I'm doing. Okay. All right, so with this, let's move on to our next question, question number 5. And here I would want all of you to apply the method that we just applied on question number 4. Don't solve it by finding out the value of n. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. So how many of you use the method that I showed you for question number 4 to solve this question? Good, very nice. Now, all of you did this question correctly except for one mistake that people who selected choice D made, and that's a very, very, um, I would say, important mistake. Why am I saying that it's an important mistake? Because there's an opportunity for you to learn from that mistake. Okay. Um, So again, we apply the same concept, okay? And since all of you were able to solve this question utilizing this concept, so I'll get right to the end of it. R is equal to 6. Now, for those of you who selected choice D, you stopped at this point, and that's not correct. Why? Because your remainder R will always be less than your divisor 5. Okay, so that is a mistake that you guys did. You did not consider this constraint. Okay, so something which is another process skill is that you always need to apply constraints. Keep in mind what your constraints are. Now, these constraints can be conceptual constraints, such as over here. This is your conceptual understanding that a remainder is always less than a divisor, that the remainder is always less than the divisor, or a constraint could be a specific constraint that's given to you in the question statement. Let's say that n is an integer, or something like that. N is an even number, n is an odd number, whatever the case may be. Okay, so you always have to be very cautious of identifying the constraints and applying those constraints appropriately. So in this case, people who selected choice D did not apply the constraint. Okay, so that's the learning for you. Okay. All right, sounds good. So with this, we've come to the end of warm-up section, and overall feedback is really make sure that you always have that 200% clarity in your concepts. Okay, so if you got even a single question wrong in in this section, make sure that you revise the concepts that are there in the course. Okay, and we have to make sure that yes, there are multiple methods to solve a question, but then your goal is to be able to solve 700, 750 level questions correctly, right? So for that, those number substitution methods may not work. Okay, and especially in data sufficiency questions, you'll feel very stifled if you don't really develop your solution from those basic principles. Okay, so that's what we're going to be focusing on this session. Okay. All right. So now let's increase the difficulty level of our questions a little bit. And we're going to move into our 650 to 700 level questions. And I'm going to get you the poll for that. So can you all please click on still solving? Okay. Before I show you the question, let me just ask you, how's the session going so far? Just want to get the pulse of the students. Good pace? Good. Okay. Very interesting. Very nice. Thank you. All right. So now let's solve this question here. Go ahead. All right, last 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Okay. So the correct answer here is choice C, which about 54% of the class was able to select. Now, how many of you used the method that I had shown you earlier? Okay, so not that many, fewer people than before. Okay. How many of you calculated the value of M or one of the values of M? Okay. So what you're seeing here is that when there is a new kind of question that's thrown at you, you always revert to your default mode, that is to do the calculations. Okay. I want you to stop the urge of doing that. Okay, because again, when you get to solving difficult questions, this is not going to help you. Calculating values is not going to really come in very handy as you solve more difficult questions. Okay, so let's look at, and again, imagine if these numbers were not this small. What if these numbers were really big? Then what would you do? Okay, you'll end up wasting your precious time in doing calculations. So let's take a look at again solid fundamentals and solve this question according to those. So same method, m is equal to 15p plus r, and my remainder is always less than my divisor, so less than r is going to be less than 15. What's given to me is m divided by 30 is equal to 8.2. So I write my equation as given equation as m is equal to 30 into 8.2. Now what I have to do is, this is where the visualization skill comes into picture. What I have to do is I have to write this equation down in such a manner that I can convert this equation into this form. So basically I have to bring this equation in the form of my required equation so that I can calculate the value of r. Now, what are the features of this equation over here? The feature is your left hand side has m, which is what you have over here as well. Your right hand side is composed of two components. One component is a multiple of 15 and the other component is not a multiple of 15. Okay, is a number that's less than 15. So that's how I have to somehow bring this given equation to, so that I can get the value of r. Now how do I do that? I simply I simply say 30 into 8.2 is equal to 30 into 8 plus 30 into 0.2. So I'm simply simplifying that equation. Okay, now what I do is I basically try to rearrange these terms so that I can get one term as a multiple of 15 and the other term as not a multiple of 15, and so I'm simply rearranging, and upon rearranging I get m is equal to 15 into 2 into 8 plus 6. Okay, therefore r is equal to 6, and that's why choice C is the correct answer over here. Does everyone follow this? What my goal over here is to simply bring the given equation in the form of this required equation. And for that, I'm simply moving certain terms around in order to get to that required form. Now, this is a process skill that you really need to build. Simply learning this over here is not going to help you, is not going to, for people who are not able to get it, it's okay, because you need to really sit down with these numbers and you really need to see how I'm rearranging this stuff. Okay, so after this session, I would recommend that you sit down with this PDF, the file that I share with you, and simply take a look at this, work on your scratch pad, and basically review whatever I have taught over here. Okay, you need to sit down with these numbers, with these equations on your own so that you get this right. Okay. But the main philosophy over here is, the philosophy that I want all of you to take away from here is that do not revert to solving for m. Don't think that you have to, your only way to solving the question is by, the only way to get to the answer is by doing the calculations. No. Try to build upon these skills. It may appear to you that you don't necessarily need to you don't necessarily need to solve this question by this longer method, but believe me, for you to be able to solve those questions, those difficult questions, you need to build upon this process skill. And this is the skill of visualization. This is the skill of looking at, okay, what is it that's given to you and what is it that you need? And then basically doing those visualization, applying the skill of visualization to solve the question. Okay. All right. So let's now solve the next question here. And again, try to apply the same method. Don't solve for the question. Don't simply calculate. So can you all please click on still solving? All right, here you go. Last 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. So choice C is the correct answer, which about 79% of the class got. Now, how many of you applied the method that I've taught earlier for the previous questions? Good. All right. So again, the same thing, m is equal to 30p plus r, where r is less than 30. What's given to me is m is equal to 15 into 8.2. Now I have to convert this into the form of this equation, which is that one of the terms should be multiple of 30 and the other term should not be a multiple of 30. Okay, so the multiple of 30 term is my 30p, and the other term that is not the multiple of 30 is my r term. Okay, so that's what I have to do over here. So what I do is m is equal to 15 into 8 plus 15 into 0.2. So I rearrange the terms, and what I get is m is equal to 15 into 2 plus into 4 plus 3. So I'm simply rearranging the terms over here. Okay, so basically what I get is r is equal to 3. Okay, and that's my correct answer. So no calculations involved, simply visualization and rearrangement of terms. That's what is needed to solve such questions. Okay. Now with this, let's get to our last question in this category. And here again, try applying the same method. Okay, and let me remove this stuff here. So let me ask you a question. For those of you who solved question number 1 in this section by calculating the answer, by calculating the value of m, and those of you who solved question number 2 using the method that you see on the slide, are you seeing your level of comfort increase to solve the question in this manner? Good. That is what I hope to achieve here. Okay, so that's really good. Do you see that this method is a lot more comfortable now in terms of it's a lot more deterministic to find the answer, and it's not really dependent on how complicated the calculations are? Do you see that as well? It's not within a limited scope, and please take my word for it. Okay, and I wouldn't be teaching you something in this session if it had a limited scope. That's definitely the case. Okay, because something which I absolutely don't believe in is tips and shortcuts or tricks that are limited to a certain kind of question only, that can be applicable only to certain kinds of question. That's something that we at e-GMAT do not believe in at all for either verbal or quant. Okay, these process skills are exist for a reason. These process skills have been developed based on our thorough analysis of each and every official question that exists out there. Okay, we've done that thorough analysis, and that's how we've been able to come up with these process skills. Okay, so thank you for asking that. Thank you for putting that as a comment, and I hope that you understand that it doesn't have limited scope. Okay, all right, so now let's solve this question here. Can you please click on still solving? Now, one more point that I want to make is the questions that you put in these polls, if I don't address those questions because I need to carry on with the session for the majority of the class, please be sure to put those questions in the Q&A part so that Ashutosh can respond to those. Okay? All right. So now this is your next question here. Go ahead. Last 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. So choice E is the correct answer. Let's go through the solution. Oh, your comment just made my day. That's really nice to hear. Okay, so m is equal to 30p plus r. That is the equation that we need to get to that is what we need the final form of the equation. Um, m is equal to 15 into 9.2. So this is what I get over here. Now simply do the visualization. Now here you have to do a bit more processing. And you finally get to the value to m as 30 into 4 plus 18. Okay, so you have to do a bit more processing over here, and again, that's where this skill comes about. Okay, and yeah, So thank you. I really appreciate your feedback over here. It's really good to know that you're getting it now. And again, as I said, you this is the first time that you're seeing something like this, and you are seeing the utility of it, right? So again, as we went from question 1 to 2 to 3, there's nothing much that changed in the question. It's just that the number of steps to get to the final equation form has actually increased, right? So you are able to see that processing. Now, do we need to process 18 also? No, you don't need to process 18, because remember what our goal is. Our goal is to get to because our goal is to get to two terms, one that's a multiple of 30 and the other that is not a multiple of 30, and that's what you've been able to get at. Okay? Okay? All right. How did I get to plus 3? Plus 3 is coming from here, 15 into point 0.2. That's 3. And 15 into 9, 15 into 8 plus 1 is simply a simplification of 9. In what possibility we need to process the remainder? Again, if your remainder term is not coming as less than the divisor, then you need to process the remainder term as well. The thing over here is you have to keep in mind that when you get to your final equation, your goal is to get one term as a multiple of 30, that's the divisor, and the other term as not a multiple of 30, and that's going to be a remainder, and that remainder should be less than the divisor. Those are the two constraints or three constraints that you're working towards. Okay? All right, so good. I'm glad that most of you are getting it. And for those of you who had issues with getting to the final thing, please post your questions in the Q&A pod so that Ashutosh can answer those. But how do you decide the simplification? Again, this is something which you have to build your skill. Okay, this is the skill that needs to be built, really. How did you get point 2? Point 2 is simply 9. Point 2 is simply split into 9 and point 2. So I'm just using the additive property here. Okay? All right. So let's move on to the end of this. So let's just wrap this section up. Basically, over here, all we did was we applied our visualization, and here we have summarized the three questions. The method is exactly the same. The intent is exactly the same. It's just that as we move from questions 1 through question 3, the degree of application increased. Okay, that's what was happening over here. In this one, it was a straightforward thing. Over here, there were two calculation steps that we had to do, two simplification steps that we had to do. Over here, we had to do more than two simplification steps. Okay. All right. So now let's move on to our next section here. So we are all very confident with this concept, right? Now, what we're going to do is in these next set of slides, we're going to build upon our understanding of this very concept. Okay. So what I'm going to show you now is simply this a very simple question, and I want you to put in your answers over here in this poll. What is the remainder when 31 plus 43 is divided by 7? So write down your answers here. Okay, that's correct. Now, how did you solve this question? The answer is 4. Now tell me, how did you solve this when I told you? Okay, get it in the form of 7x plus r, add both remainders. Absolutely right. So again, there are two ways in which you could have gone about solving this. You could have either taken up sequence 1, which is simply add the terms and then divide the sum by 7, or you could have taken individual terms. So divide 31 by 7, gotten the remainder, divide 43 by 7, gotten the remainder, and add the two remainders. Okay, so either of the two sequences would have worked. Now let's change the question to product. What is the remainder when 31 times 43 is divided by 7? The answer is 3. Absolutely right. Now tell me, how did you solve this? 3 times 1 is equal to 3. Absolutely right. So in this case, if you followed sequence 1, that is, if you first took the product and then you divided that by 7 to find the remainder, that would have taken a long time because again, these would have been more complicated calculations. So a very straightforward thing to do is simply divide, get the remainder for the individual terms, and multiply the two remainders. So the whole point of this section over here is that you can add and multiply remainders. Okay, that is something which I wanted to bring across over here. Okay, you can definitely add and multiply remainders, and why you can do that has been explained in this section over here. So I'm not going to go through the details of this. Again, you can work it out on your own as well. So after the session, when I share this PDF with you, just work it out on your own and get to and be absolutely confident that you can add and you can multiply the remainders. Okay. All right. So now let's apply this concept on these questions. All right. Can you all please click on still solving? All right. Here you go. All right. Last 10 seconds. Okay. I'm going to end the poll now. Tell me the method that you guys use to solve this question. Now, this was actually a trick question here. Why am I saying a trick question? Just saw, okay. So for those of you who saw that 24 is a multiple of 3 and selected choice A, absolutely right approach. Okay. Now again, for those of you who figured out, okay, what's the multiple, what's the remainder when you divide 24 by 3, what's the remainder when you divide 38 by 3, you guys didn't observe what was already, what you guys didn't observe that 24 is completely divisible by 3. Okay. So something that I'm going to tell you is, when you see an approach, right now what happened was that you guys, I just told you that you can multiply the remainder, so you were just very excited to apply that. Okay, but you forgot to make observations over here. The observation is that 24 is completely divisible by 3, so you don't even have to do anything over here, you don't have to process anything. Okay, so again, whenever you see a question, make sure that you always draw inferences. You always observe what's given in the question statement and then you draw inferences before you start to do any kind of processing. Okay, that's very, very important. So over here, the correct answer is choice A. Now, for those of you who selected choice C, tell me, why did you select choice C? Where did you falter? And that's a pretty big chunk of class. What made you select 2 as the answer here? What you did over here was you selected choice C because you added the two remainders. You added the two remainders. Okay, and that's not correct. So again, you are, first of all, you're not multiplying the remainder, so you didn't focus on what is given to you as to what operation has been given. Secondly, you didn't make the observation. Remind me why we use the principle of 24 being fully divisible, because that's what you have to figure out. I mean, what is the remainder when this product is divided by 3? You see that 24 is always divisible by 3, so the remainder is always going to be 0. This entire term is completely divisible by 3. Why? Because 24 is divisible by 3. Okay, so you're just making observations. All right? Okay, so now let's move on to our next question. Question number 5. Go ahead, solve this question. All right. So the correct answer here is choice C, which 81% of the class got which 81% of the class selected. So really good. So let's solve this question real quick. So this expression can be considered as 25 into 38 multiplied by 25 into 38 multiplied by 25 into 38. So we can calculate the remainder for each term, and then all the remainders can be multiplied. Okay. So basically all I'm doing over here is I can calculate the remainder for 25, calculate the remainder for 38, multiply the two, and then raise the whole thing to the power 3. Why? Because you have 3 like terms over here. So what I get is 1 times 2 raised to the power 3, which is equal to 2 cube, which is equal to 8. But my divisor is 3, so the remainder has to be less than 3. So I process this 8 further, and then I get remainder as 2. So that's the correct answer. So in this question, you are applying the method that we learned there, that remainders can be multiplied. You're applying that aspect, and then you're also applying the constraints. So for those of you who selected choice C as the correct answer, did you follow the method that you see on the screen? I don't believe there is any other method that you could have applied. So good. So you can see how the basics that we have learned, you are able to apply them in questions that are getting more difficult. Right now, yes, this question may seem as very easy given your performance as well. This question may seem as very easy, but this is a difficult question, and you are able to solve these questions correctly now because you're getting comfortable with the process. Okay? So basically, calculations can be simplified extensively, and over here in this section, we learned that we can add remainders and we can multiply remainders. And the extension of multiplying remainders is also is in terms of the exponents, that you can raise the remainder to appropriate powers as well. Okay, so now this is your simplification skill under play. Now let's talk about negative remainders, and this is where things get a bit more interesting. Now, how many of you are familiar with negative remainders? Okay, so half of the class is, less than half of the class is. Okay, so let's proceed. Basically, what we know about remainders is that remainder is always less than the divisor and remainder is always greater than or equal to 0. That's what we know about remainders. Okay. So let's take up 5 divided by 2 and calculate the remainder for that. The remainder for that is 1. Now, how do I get 1 as the answer? Because 5 is equal to 2 times 2, that's 4 plus 1, right? Now, likewise, 8 divided by 3, remainder is 2, right? Now, writing it in my dividend, in my divisor remainder equation, 8 is equal to 3 into 2 plus 2, right? So far, so good. Now, what if instead of writing my equation in this form, what if I wrote my equation as 5 is equal to 2 times 3, that's 6 minus 1. I could write the equation in this form as well. Or what if I wrote 8 as 3 times 3 minus 1? So here I'm getting negative remainders. These are what I call as negative remainders. Okay. Now, why do I have to think about this in terms of negative remainders? Because if I translate some remainders from positive number that's greater than 1 into a negative number that's actually minus 1, it can simplify my calculations a whole lot. Now, whatever I'm going to tell you right now, it has limited applications. So this is what I'm going to tell you. It definitely has limited applications because this is applicable only for divisibility equations, only for questions wherein your remainder can be, wherein your calculations can be simplified by applying the negative remainder concept. So the concept itself is a negative remainder concept. So that's why the limited applicability of it. Okay, because here I'm teaching you a concept of negative remainders. Now I always have to apply my constraints. What are my constraints? My constraints are that the remainder should always be greater than or equal to 0. So before I mark my answer, I always have to convert the negative remainder back to positive remainder. And for that, I simply add and subtract the divisor. And again, I would urge all of you to go through this slide at the end of this session when I share the PDF with you. But ultimately, right now, I want you to keep in mind that what I'm doing is positive remainder is always equal to negative remainder plus divisor. This is something that I want you to just make a note of in your scratch pad because you'll be applying this for the next couple of questions. Okay, but the derivation of that is there on this slide, so go through this derivation after the session is over at your own pace. Okay, so again, why do we use negative remainders? For ease of processing. Okay, and I'm going to show you the application of negative remainders in this next question, and then I'm going to give you question number 7 to solve on your own. What is the remainder when 24 cube times 38 to the power 5 plus 17 to the power 7 is divided by 3? Now, in this case, we already know that this term over here, let me get my annotation, this term contributes remainder 0 because 24 is completely divisible by 3. Okay, so over here, this is already 0. Now what I have to calculate is 17 divided by 3 raised to the 17 raised to the power 7 divided by 3 remainder of that. Okay, so what I see over here is 17. If I simply utilize my negative remainder concept, I get 17 is equal to 3 into 6 minus 1. Okay, now if I didn't use the negative remainder concept, what I would have gotten is 17 is equal to 3 into 5 plus 2. Okay, so now I would have had to process this 2 through this processing, and that would have been a lot more calculation intensive. Versus what I'm doing over here, I have 17 is equal to 3 into 6 minus 1. I simply have to, my processing becomes really easy with this negative remainder of minus 1. So all I have to do is minus 1 raised to the power 7, which is minus 1. And now to convert that back into a positive remainder, what I have to do is minus 1 plus 3, because that's the processing that I have to do. You take negative remainder, add the divisor back to it, and you get your positive remainder as 2. So the correct answer over here is 2. Okay, so this is why. Now versus if I had used my positive remainder concept, then I would have had to do 2 raised to the power 7, and then I would have to figure the remainder out of that again, remainder when that's divided by 3, and that would have been really a long drawn calculation. Okay, now imagine if instead of 2 this number was 4 or this number was 5, then again in this case you have the divisor as 3, but what if this divisor was 7 and you had the remainder as 5? Again, you would have had to do quite a bit of calculation. So again, this negative remainder concept works when it's possible to have a negative remainder of 1, and that really simplifies the calculations quite a bit. Okay? So now let's solve question number 7. There you go. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Wow, almost everyone got this question correct. The correct answer over here is choice E, and you can see over here it's just another question to practice negative remainders on. So over here you can appreciate that if you had to process it with positive remainder, it would have really complicated the solution a whole lot. But now your calculations are very much simplified. Okay, so again, negative remainder concept is a concept pertaining to divisibility and remainders. So again, very limited concept. It is a limited concept, but again, it's important for you to know that for questions such as these. I don't understand why do we need to use negative remainder. The remainder is 5 with both the methods. Well, the remainder is not 5 because here you had to process over here what you have is 17 raised to the power 7. So you had to process, if you use the remainder as 5, you would have had to do 5 raised to the power 7, calculate that, and then divide that by 6 again to figure out the remainder. Okay, you are able to bypass all those calculations here because you have used negative remainder concept. It is necessary to raise 5 to the power 7 because otherwise you won't be able to get the answer. Otherwise you wouldn't have solved the question. Okay, all right, so everyone clear with the negative remainder concept? Again, the concept may seem a little bit difficult, but when you see the importance of it in terms of solving such questions, it becomes really straightforward. Okay. Okay, so now let's come back to our initial set of questions. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you a chance to solve these questions once more. Okay, so go ahead, click on still solving. These are the questions that you saw up front in the beginning of the session. So I have a question here. Just to confirm, negative remainder is not limited to -1. It's not limited to -1. You're absolutely correct. It can be -2 as well. But again, the whole point of using negative remainder is that it simplifies calculations. So whenever you think about using negative remainders, make sure that you're using it when your numbers, the absolute value of the remainder is actually less than the absolute value of the positive remainder. Okay, that's when you should use it. Because again, you're making your calculations simplified. You're making your calculations easier. That's the whole point of using negative remainders. Okay. All right. So now let's move on to question number 8. Go ahead and try solving it once more. All right, last 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to broadcast the results now. For those of you who changed your answers from when you solved the question first to now, why did you do so? And are you, first of all, tell me, are you confident about your answers now? Are you confident about your answer selection now? Okay. Now tell me, why did you change your answers? What changed between then and now? What changed between your approach an hour back to your approach now to solve this question? Okay, let's hear from some more people, very confident, the understanding of concept. What else? We know how to solve m plus 1. Absolutely right. Okay, so awareness of concepts, level of confidence. Okay, so let me show you the comparison over here. So if you simply look at the percentages, there were very few people, about 26% of the class had selected choice A in upfront when you solve the question, and majority of the class, 54%, had selected choice C. Now that has actually swapped. Okay, so that just shows that, okay, you have some solid concepts and a solid process, and that's why you're able to solve the question correctly. Now, granted, there are people, obviously, slightly less than half of the class has still answered this question incorrectly. So we're going to go through the solution of this question in detail. Okay, so what is a remainder when a positive integer p is divided by a positive integer m, where m is greater than 1? Okay, so I have to find p remainder m where m is greater than 1. And what is statement 1 says what? P is equal to m plus 1 raised to the power 8. Okay. Now I have to find out the remainder when m plus 1 is divided by m plus 1 raised to the power 8 is divided by m. Sorry. I have to find the remainder when p is divided by m. Right? Now what is p? P is m plus 1 raised to the power 8 from statement number 1, right? So m plus 1 raised to the power 8 divided by m, remainder of that. Now I can apply the concepts that I learned, that I can simply take this 8 outside, right? Because I can first find out the remainder when m plus 1 is divided by m, and then I can raise that remainder to the power 8, right? So that's the conceptual knowledge that you applied over here. So m plus 1 divided by m gives the remainder 1, right? So my answer is 1 over here. So statement 1 actually gives me the complete answer. Okay. Now let's take a look at statement 2. Statement 2 says m is equal to 8. Okay, but it gives me no information about what p is. Okay, remember, when I'm analyzing statement 2, I don't have to keep, I should not keep statement 1 in mind when I'm analyzing just statement 2. Okay, so all statement 2 tells me is m is equal to 8. It does not give me any value for p. That's why answer cannot be found with statement 2. So the correct answer over here is choice A. Now, my guess is that when you guys solved this question the first time, what you thought was that statement 1 is giving you a relationship between P and M, and statement 2 is giving you information about M. So putting these two together, you can calculate the remainder. You can calculate the value of P, and then you can find the remainder. How many of you who selected choice C selected it because of this reason? Okay. And this is where your solid fundamentals come into picture. This is where a step-by-step process comes into picture. In this case, so what you guys fell in a trap of was that choice C appears to be the more likely choice. Again, appears being the working word over here. Okay, because you feel that, okay, there is a relationship given over here and statement 2 gives one of the values, so you can calculate it. So you don't even give statement 1 a full shot. Whereas if you think about it, statement 1 is itself sufficient. You don't need any information about 8. Regardless of the value of P or M, the remainder for this thing is always going to be 1. It doesn't matter if M is 8 or 10 or 108 or whatever the case may be. Okay? So again, very, very important to, over here with DS, it's so very important to follow each and every step of the process. You understand the question statement. You figure out what it is that you need to calculate from the question. Then you understand statement 1. Okay, you apply, you figure out is statement 1 sufficient to answer the question asked in the question statement. Okay, if it is, well and good. Then you analyze statement 2 in isolation. Do not consider statement 1 at all. Okay, so again, you need to follow the right kind of process. Now let's move on to question number 9, and I'm going to give you the opportunity again to solve this question. Go ahead. All right, last 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. Okay, so the performance has improved for this question as well, but not as much as for the previous question. So earlier, about 30% of the class had selected choice A. This time around, 46% of the class has selected choice A. So that is good. The correct answer here is choice A. But I see that the votes for choice D has also increased, have also increased. And yes, I've seen that more people have been able to come to a conclusive answer. So that has been the difference. So how do you guys perceive the difference in your performance in question number 9? Tell me what your feeling is towards this question. Negative remainder concept being applied, yes. Very comfortable, greater clarity, that is really good. I cannot believe how easy this question turned out with negative remainder concept. You're absolutely right. And that's the beauty of learning concepts in a progressively difficult manner. I mean, had I told you negative remainder concepts in isolation, you wouldn't have gotten it that very well. But we build upon that, right? And that's the beauty of showing the concepts in that manner. Okay, and that's how the entire e-GMAT course is built upon. Same answer, but this time I was confident because I can now use negative remainder. Okay, good, good. All right, so I have a question about minus 1 raised to power 2, 3, 5, 7 all give the remainder, so why is it not option D? Okay, let's solve the question now. Okay, so question statement analysis. Now, let me ask you this. Before you guys, before you all started processing statement 1, what was your takeaway from the question statement? Or in other words, what was the simplification of the question statement? N can be 4, 9, 25, whether N is even or odd. Absolutely right, whether N is even or odd. Okay, so let's go through this. We have to find out the remainder when 38n squared is divided by 13. That's what we need to find out. Okay, the remainder. Now I can write 38 as 13 into 3 minus 1. Okay, if I were using positive remainder, my regular remainders, I would have gotten 38 is equal to 13 into 2 plus 12. Okay, so there's no way that I can do all of this processing with 12. There's no easy way in which I can do all of this processing with 12 as the remainder. So I choose to go ahead with negative remainder. So what I get is minus 1 raised to the power n squared. Okay, now I have to consider two possibilities with n. Okay, one could be that n is even, and again, why am I considering even or? Because the value of minus 1 raised to the power n square will change depending upon if n is even or if n is odd. Okay, so again, in DS questions, I always have to figure out what my possible values are. Okay, and that's how I come up with my cases. Okay, so case 1 is that n is odd and case 2 is that n is even. Okay, if n is odd, in that case the remainder is going to be minus 1, because if n is odd, then minus 1 raised to the power n square is going to be minus 1, right? So in that case my remainder is minus 1 and I need to convert that into positive remainder. So I add the divisor back and I get 12 as the positive remainder. In the case that n is even, the remainder is going to be plus 1, because minus 1 raised to the power even power is always plus 1. Okay, so I need to figure out whether the remainder is 1 or whether the remainder is 12, which means that I need to find out what is the nature, even or nature of n. So if my statements give me that answer, then I can answer the question asked in the question statement. So now I'm going to process statement number 1. N leaves no remainder when divided by 4. What does that mean? That directly means that n is an even number. So statement 1 gives me the answer that n is even. Okay. Now let me take also the potential correct answer choices could be A or D. Now for D to be correct, I have to make sure that statement 2 also gives me the answer independently. Now what does statement 2 say? Statement 2 says the square root of n is a prime number, which means that n is equal to prime number squared. Now my prime numbers can be 2, 3, 5, 7 and so on. Now one of the prime numbers is even, the others are odd, which means that I really cannot find the answer, because statement 2 does not tell me in a concrete manner, in a definitive manner, if n is odd or even. That is why the correct answer here is choice A. Alright, so for those of you who did not select choice A as, first of all, for those of you who selected choice A as the correct answer, did you answer it for the right reasons? Okay, good. Now, for those of you who did not select choice A as the correct answer, where did you falter? At what point did you falter? Tell me. Again, very important to make sure that you understand where you faltered. Which step did you falter at? Missed out 2 as prime number, thought all prime numbers are odd. So again, a very, very important conceptual understanding. Could not apply negative remainder, that's okay. If you could not apply negative remainder, make sure that you go through this PDF once more, go through the recording once more to understand the concept of negative remainder, because now you can see where how these simple concepts can be applied. Okay, unable to process second statement, I hope that you are able to process it now. Why in the analysis you say remainder is minus 1? Because I always have minus 1 and then finally 12, because I always have to convert my remainder from negative into a positive, because on the GMAT remainders are always positive. We are using the concept of negative remainders just in process to simplify our calculations. Need for a definitive answer in statement 2. Again, if you faltered at that point, then what you need to really work on is the process for data sufficiency questions. Okay, so regardless of what the topic of the question is, you need to build upon your process application for data sufficiency questions. Okay. All right. Let's come to question number 10 now, and I'm going to open up the poll again. Go ahead and solve question number 10. All right, I'm going to end the poll in the next 10 seconds. All right. So comparing it from the last time around, 43% of the class selected choice D as the correct answer, and that number has now increased to 55%. Although there are more people who have selected choice A now than before as the correct answer. Okay, so let's go through this question in detail. So what is the remainder when 4m is divided by 16, where m is a positive integer greater than 1? Okay, so 4m divided by 16, I need to find the remainder for that. So that's about it. There is nothing more that I can do except that I can write down my remainder equation. 4m is equal to 16q plus r, where 16 is the divisor, q is the quotient, and r is the remainder. Okay, and r is less than it should be less than or equal to 15 or less than 16. Okay, now statement 1, m leaves the remainder of 4 when divided by 32 raised to the power 32. So I'm simply writing statement number 1 as in the form of my remainder equation, and k is the quotient here that I've assumed. Okay, now for me to figure out what is it ultimately that I need, ultimately I need the value of r, right? So what I have to do is I have to somehow bring this equation in the form of this required equation. Okay, so again, remember the stuff that we did early on in our basic questions. Now I'm applying that over here in this DS question. Okay, so for this, again, I'm applying my process skill of visualization. Okay, so what I have to do is I multiplied this equation with 4 so that I can get it in the form of this required equation. Okay, that's what I'm doing over here. So when I do that, I get 4m is equal to 4 into this entire right hand side. Okay, now I open up the parentheses and I start working my way through simplification. What is my goal? My goal is to get one term in this equation as a multiple of 16 and the other term as not a multiple of 16. That is what my goal is. So I carry on simplifying this, and what I get is I actually get 4m is equal to 16p plus 16, or 4m is equal to 16p plus 1. So I don't get any term that is not a multiple of 16, which means my remainder is actually 0. Okay, so I can find the answer based on statement 1. How many of you applied how many of you utilized this concept to solve the question, or this process skill to solve statement 1? Okay, for those of you who didn't do this, what did you do? How did you process statement 1? Got intimidated by 32 raised to power 32. Okay, that's very frank. Thank you. What else? How did you solve statement 1? Marking answer was wrong, didn't multiply m is equal. Okay, so do you guys see how whatever we have been doing in this session, you're able to apply that so beautifully over here in this DS question? So again, people who are finding it difficult to apply those methods here, you guys need to work on your process skills. That's the feedback that I would give to you. You need to work on the process skill of visualization. Okay, it's very, very important. Okay, all right. So now let's move on to statement number 2. Now, statement 2 is a bit more complicated statement. So here again, you have to be very patient. You have to make certain observations. Now, what it says is that m cube is divisible by 16. Now, if m cube is divisible by 16, what can I say about m cube? What can I say about m cube if m cube is divisible by 16? What can I say about the even odd nature of m cube? Yes, it is even. Now, if it is even, and if I write m in terms of its prime factors, what will I get? M is equal to 2 to the power a, because I know that m definitely has 2 as a prime factor, times p1 to the power b times p2 to the power c, and so on, right? So this is how I'm writing m cube m. Yes, this is how I'm writing m, because I know that m is even. Now, I know that m cube is divisible by 16. So what I say is that, okay, let me cube both sides. I get m cube is equal to 2 to the power 3a times so on and so forth, right? Now, because m cube is divisible by 16 and 16 is 2 to the power 4, what I can say is that the power 3a should be greater than or equal to 4. So I'm simply applying this thing over here. 16 is equal to 2 to the power 4, and I got the power 3a over here. So 3a should be at least 4, okay, which means that the minimum value of a is 2. Now I take this further and I say, okay, what is my m? My m is 2 to the power 2 into something meaning these are the prime factors. So basically what I'm saying is that 2 to the power 2 means 4. M is definitely 4 times something, which means 4m will be 4 times 2 to the power 2, which means 4m is equal to 16. Q is something over here, which means that R is equal to 0. Okay. So again, in this case, what I'm doing is I'm simply utilizing the information about what's given to me, and I'm utilizing prime factorization to figure out, okay, what it is that I absolutely know. Because ultimately what I need to know is that what is the remainder when 4m is divided by 16, and I know that 16 is equal to 2 to the power 4. So if I get some information about what the value of m is in terms of factors of 2, then I should be able to find my answer. Okay, so again, this statement requires that higher level of application, which is something that you will be exposed to as you go through the various application files in the course, as you go through practice files in the course, and as you go through scholaranium questions. Okay, but again, if you think about it, there isn't anything complex that I'm doing here. It's simply processing information in a certain manner. Okay, so to summarize all of this, what I would say is that uh, GMAT quant can definitely be mastered. Okay, you can improve from a low quant score if you focus on learning. Okay, that's very much possible. Okay, now this first success story is for people who think they are really good in quant. Okay, and you can review and you can see his verified review on GMAT Club. Now Krish had always done well in quant but was stumped by GMAT because he constantly faltered while answering GMAT questions, falling in familiar traps. Frustrated with the lack of progress, he decided to change his approach. He started following a methodical approach, even changing his approach significantly for DS. And after making these changes, he was able to improve his quant score to Q51, the highest possible, scoring a 740. So, really, what he focused on was organizing information in a better manner. What he focused on was making sure that he simplifies and he applies the logic. Now, this next success story is of a person from South America, and he was someone who was not really excellent in GMAT quant. Okay, and he was stuck at Q45 despite trying really hard. He needed a high quant score because he wanted to apply to a finance focused school such as NYU Wharton, as well as schools such as Tepper. To improve beyond Q45, what Leonardo did was that he adopted a methodical approach. He started consciously focusing on constraints, showing his work on paper. Once he had that approach right, he made extensive use of analytics that Quant Scholaranium provided to isolate the areas that he needed to improve upon. And then he used the custom quizzing feature to ensure that he had actually improved. And because of his good quant score and excellent verbal score, Leo was admitted to Wharton, Stern, and Tepper. Now, the third success story is of an individual who was extremely weak in quant. His starting score was Q30, a mere 20 percentile. Mazibar, which is his BTG forum name, spent a ton of time reading quant books but was not able to improve. He benefited from the progressive learning architecture at e-GMAT, in which he was able to cement his basics before taking on difficult questions. And in his case, his basics were not strong enough. When his basics were not strong enough, he was given appropriate feedback. Because of quizzes that are built into each file, he was able to leverage data to help him. Mazibar was able to score Q45, which is 59 percentile in quant, and this was a huge improvement in his quant score. Now, this next success story is of an individual who had extremely strong determination to study at top B schools. He started at Q38, which coincidentally is 38 percentile in GMAT quant. He realized that he needed a stellar quant score to get an admit from Wharton and GSB Chicago. And the only way to improve from such a low score was to truly focus on learning, which he did using the video lessons. He was short on time, so he used analytics in Quant Scholaranium to isolate the areas that he needed most help in. Like Leonardo, he used the custom quiz feature to ensure that he did indeed improve on these topics. So, really speaking, to ace GMAT quant, you need to build good habits. Okay, you need to understand that the conceptual aspects are taken care of. You need to be methodical in your approach to solving each and every question. You need to become an active reader. Read the question statement appropriately. Don't read question statement in a passive manner. You need to be cognizant of those constraints that are there. You need to ensure that when you're solving easier questions, you're solving those keeping in mind that the process that you use is going to be utilized in solving those difficult DS questions as well. So really focus on learning and focus on adopting good habits. Don't rely on tricks. Don't rely on tricks just to solve certain questions. Okay, and that's what you're going to see in the e-GMAT course, that if you follow along the concepts and the application files in the course, you will be able to see how that structured process really helps you to solve difficult questions as well. So really, first of all, make sure that you have a 200% clarity in concepts. Make sure that you solve questions in a step-by-step manner. The goal should not be to simply answer the question. The goal should be to solve the question in a structured manner that you can apply on difficult questions as well. Become an active reader of question statement. Trust the test maker. He's not going to throw anything at you that you cannot solve. In the last question where we had 32 raised to the power 32, yes, that number seems really big, but again, he's not good. The test maker is not out there to trick you. The test maker is out there to figure out your problem solving skills. Okay, and if you focus on the basics, if you trust yourself with the process, right, there's no reason why you won't be able to solve any question. And in the end, as I said, believe in your skills. You have everything in your arsenal to solve any such problems. Okay, so as next steps, what I would recommend is all the e-GMAT students to go through divisibility and remainders files block in their course. Okay, and then solve again for all the students, regardless of whether you're e-GMAT students or not. Go through the PDF that I'm going to share right now. There are 2 questions for your practice, but definitely go through the entire presentation and solve number properties questions in Scholaranium as well. Okay, for e-GMAT students, just go through the coursework as designed, and make sure that you continually focus on your application files and your practice files. All right. So with this, we've come to the end of this session, and let me just. I'm going to invite Rajat back into the session to take any questions that you may have. But while I do that, I would like you to give your feedback over here. Tell me what you liked in the session and what your key takeaways are. That really helps us to make sure that we continue to give you content that you are able to um, gain from. Okay, so where will you get the PDF? I'm going to be sharing the PDF with you shortly. Let me just yes, my throat is much better than yesterday. Thank you so much for observing that. I've been taking rest since the last session. Thank you. All right, and okay, here is the PDF. And I'm going to go into mute mode for just a second while I invite Rajat back into the session. In the meanwhile, if you want, you can post your questions in the Q&A pod here so that Rajat can take your questions. And thank you very much for your feedback. Intro concepts quickly applied would have liked one more example in each block of questions. Definitely, we can definitely take that comment and take that feedback and implement that in our next session. I enjoy trying solving hard questions first. Good. I like that too. All right then. So all the very best to all of you. Let us know how we can help you further so that you get to your target GMAT score and get to your dream MBA school.
Alright guys, let's go to the last part of the webinar, which is the open-ended Q&A. Let me also share the batch calendar with you. All right. Okay, let's look at the Q&A pod. How does e-GMAT help you tackle IR and AWA? We have one of the world's most comprehensive IR courses. And frankly, I'll tell you, once you go through our CR course, you won't need any help with AWA. Out of the 39,000 students that we've had so far, not one has come back. In fact, we have had students who've actually created AWA templates. Let me just share one with you. There's one that one of our students created. Yeah, I mean, AW is a piece of cake, frankly. All right, here's one. How long are our quizzes? It depends on what you're trying to take. If you want to take an ability quiz, each ability quiz is about between 24 and 30 minutes. We also have some other quizzes which can help you, which are about an hour of effort. So overall, I mean, if you want to get an initial idea of how well you're doing, you need to put between an hour to an hour and a half or so to get those precise starting points or starting milestones. Again, you can write to Rajat or Payal at e-gmat.com and we can help you with the same. Suman says, since the GMAT Live Prep has started for on the 27th, if I enroll now, will I lose sessions? I mean, you won't lose sessions, but yes, you missed a couple of sessions. Now, one thing which I will tell you is you get access for 6 months and we start a batch every 15 days or so. Every 2 weeks is when we start a batch. So if you miss a session right now, you can attend the recordings and follow along with it or join the next batch. I mean, and this is something which a lot of people love about this because not everyone can attend all sessions. Your personal commitments do catch up with you at times, and so the flexibility to attend a session in another batch or to watch the recordings is what people love. Okay. Jay says, I've taken 3 practice tests first before starting the study. I've taken 2 more tests in second week and third week and I've scored V38, Q49, V34, Q50. Should I enroll for just verbal or for both verbal and quant? Let's assume those practice tests are good indicators. Let's assume that none of the questions, Jay, that you got on the test were those that you'd already seen. In that case, you're already at Q49, Q50, then I would say just enroll for verbal and not for quant. Now, if those practice tests aren't good indicators, then I would take a practice test where you haven't seen any of the questions prior to this. So that's kind of my only thing. But if you think those are fair indicators, then yes, I mean you're pretty much there if you've scored Q15 on the tests. All right, perfect. Any other questions, guys? Okay, with that, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you guys for attending the webinar today, and thank you for rating this session as well. Thank you for all that feedback. Again, remember we have 2 webinars. We have the RC webinar next week. Let me share the upcoming free session links so that you can register for them. We have the RC one next week, and then the quant workshop after that. Yes, this is the live session for NP2 Pratap. Yes. So And Shivani, thank you very much for your appreciation. It means a lot to us. Okay, guys, with that, thank you very much. And make sure you go through the concepts on primes in the free trial because that would help solidify whatever you learned today. I wish to see many of you on e-GMAT.com. Also, there are some really neat concepts on GMAT Verbal over there, as well as some ability quizzes that you can really take to assess your starting points or where your current prep level, what your current prep level is. For that, thank you very much and study well and go get to your target GMAT score.